has been trained on, and also like the algorithm it's using would also have to be revealed so that we kind of understand how it how this representation further traveled.
Yeah, just the way you were talking about it then, I was thinking about that principle of reproducibility in science. And it's almost like what I'm hearing here is people would love to have enough information that you could sort of reproduce and in some way verify that that's kind of how the image was produced. Of course, images have always been changed and tweaked a little bit. I noticed seeing my headshot, as large as it was, that the brand studio did a little bit of retouching on my picture. Not with AI, like just in the ways that we've always done it. So I guess, it's also a question of degree in that sense. Aside from that flippant point, the other thing I wanted to say is, I guess, on Commons, you always see who uploaded the image. And so there's also that possibility of conversation. And we were all saying earlier this morning, we want it to be a human-led process, a social process. And so yeah, we definitely want to make sure we capture good structured information that allows you to search and filter, but there's also that possibility to have a conversation with the maker of the image and understand a little bit more of the context in that way too.
Maybe I could just describe a different scenario, which is on Flickr.com, which is, as I mentioned in the presentation, it's about 20 years old now. There's 50 billion images in there, and millions of users. So it's a very large service. And just for information, since the service began, you can associate a type with each picture. Is it a photograph? Is it a screenshot or an illustration? That type of thing. I think there's 4 categories. And just last year, I think it was, they introduced a new category for the first time, which was called virtual photography. So these are photographs from inside 3D environments like Second Life, that kind of thing. Because people who are creating photographs inside those kinds of environments were publishing those pictures on Flickr. And, there are some people in the community who are saying, that's not a photograph. But, depending on how you define it, it actually is. There's some trigger, there's some capture, it's kind of the same. So I'm just kind of curious when the company is going to incorporate this sense of a generated image into the classification system on Flickr, because there are already generated images being uploaded, but they haven't gone to the sort of depth that the Wikimedia community is in terms of that conversation. But as you say, photographs have always been manipulated. Some people say every photograph is a lie, So it's a bit tricky, isn't it? It's sort of comfort levels. And I guess the other comment I would have is the entire provenance of a generated image. I guess there's a question for me there about legibility, especially if that provenance is programmed. If I have to reproduce those acts using tools I don't know how to operate, for me that means the policy is less useful. But
yeah. Okay, I'm bringing there's a question or a comment.
So I am Anton, user to Hong, a long-year contributor to Wikimedia Commons and AR enthusiast. So you were talking about that when uploading an image to Wikimedia Commons, there should be or should be not a prompt to write what was the prompt to the AI to generate this image, and you said that user should decide on themselves whether to write it or not. If we ask them, they will answer. If we will not, we should not hope that they will do it themselves. I will give you an example. In Austria, 80% of drivers have agreed to donate their organs if they die in a car accident. In Germany, only 20% did so. Why? Because in Austria, you need to specifically write that you don't want to do that. in Germany, you need to specifically write that you want to do that, and that produced different results in people making a decision. Also, um, uh, if you have uploaded an image, maybe someone wants to add something to that image. For that, they should know how you have generated image, so they can continue from where you left and not begin from scratch. They can take the very same prompt and try to play around with it and maybe produce a bit better result or much better result. Well, of course, there is also a thing to keep in mind that two different users or a same person in different times in the same system of generative AI with the same prompt can get two different results. There are some randomness in this, so maybe some seeds should be also added or something like that, so you can continue exactly from the place the other user or you previously have left from in the past.
Wonderful. There are many questions to bring forward. I think this resonates first, like the discussion of opt-in, opt-out for one, and I think this might be something for Connor. Okay.
Thank you, Susanna. Yeah, actually, I just wanted to pick up on kind of the last point that you mentioned about what is kind of coming out of the system at the moment. In the US and most jurisdictions are saying that what is just the raw thing that is coming out of AI systems is not copyrightable, which I think is probably an interesting thing to talk about in all these platforms where material is being uploaded, because you can't, or you shouldn't, we would discourage putting copyright licenses on something that doesn't have copyright. So I think there's still stuff to be unpacked on that. I don't quite get what you mean, Susanna, with the opt-in.
No, maybe that was the drivers, the organ issue.
Yes. Well, yeah, exactly.
Depends on what you ask, what the result is that you get.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the question of nudging, being able to ask things in a certain way to get a different result is definitely. I think there's a follow-up here. Go ahead.
Okay. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Federico from Wikimedia. I just wanted to ask to repeat what you just said. What about putting licenses on things that may not be copyrightable? Because we ask usually in Wikimedia to put CC0 on things which is potentially not copyrightable, because CC0 is not a license. But
and it dedicates everything to the public domain. That's a good practice for sure.
Yeah, I was going to maybe make a more general comment about the organ donation challenge. You know, we're now facing the sort of redesign and redevelopment of quite a lot of software that has its values encoded in the user interfaces, you know, and these new default settings that we help content creators adopt is going to take a long time, especially in really big services like Flickr, where there's, 50 million people we need to email kind of thing. That's a bit of an ad for the session that Connor and I are going to run in the morning, which is sort of about human scale permissions in machine scale systems. So I hope we can talk a lot more about this as perhaps a smaller group tomorrow.
I just wanted to say something about opting out, because it's like widely discussed that it should be an option to opt out, but it's really not clear what it would mean in practice. Like, how would you opt out, and would that mean that the materials that have likely have been trained, that the models that have been trained on maybe some of your works would have to be retrained. Like it's very complicated, and it's really not clear at the moment what it would mean, or like probably would just prevent the use of your work in the data sets used for training, but in the future it would not work retroactively. But would that be fair?
I just had a quick follow-up point. One thing we've been also reflecting upon is that your sense of permission will change based on the scale or type of audience. So, you know, I'd be okay to share a photo of my cat with you, but it doesn't necessarily mean I'd like it to be, you know, accepted into an archive to be kept for 10,000 years, you know, or put on a billboard or used in this particular kind of program, or, you know, and I think, again, with the sort of things that we're encoding into software, they're very rationalized and straightforward compared with actual use with actual humans. So I don't know how we get software to encode that kind of complicatedness, but it's yeah.
I'll just jump into that conversation a bit more, which is to say that I think there is definitely an opt-in that I think is important and is good. Like there are, as I mentioned, there's like 1 million AI services and software that are good for humanity, good for open culture, good for many purposes. I think what the opt-out conversation is really about is saying we don't want to give our creativity or the world's creativity away and then have it be sold back to us through open AI or other commercial entities. And that's kind of this difficult question, is what are we comfortable with? Is it we want to give it away on a big scale, or do we want to make the world a better place by making good AI programs and stuff?
And then just following up to that, like who decides? And I think that's a particularly tricky decision to make if you're a cultural institution and you're stewarding a collection. But there are lots of other sort of stakeholders or owners, in a way, of the materials that you hold. And so you as an institution can opt in or consent to particular things, but what do you need to do in terms of consulting with other stakeholders and communities to sort of make that decision on their behalf? And that's actually a conversation we wrestled with a little bit, even in the Wikisource Loves Manuscripts project I talked about in Bali, because obviously it was the Balinese language community Wikimedians who were making that decision, and there had been some consent from the sort of original owners of those collections, so the families or institutions. And in some ways for us, it felt more straightforward when it was the family or the sort of community making the decision, because they were both like the current custodians, but also the original owners in a way. And I guess with a cultural institution, there's often that separation. And so I think that question is even trickier for some of you guys.
Yeah, that's really also a discussion we've been having at the National Library. And a couple of years back, we did a collaboration with the Turku NLP research group, who are making large language models for Finnish language. And we were able to provide them with a set of data from our collections, like from digitized or digital collections that they would then use to train language models on. But that was only a one-off, and we haven't done it since, even though they have moved on to newer models. And it's a really difficult question of since we are, like you said, we are sort of custodians of the material, but we don't really have we don't own it. It's not ours. It's just, we are just keeping it. Is it the right thing to do to provide this this data as training data for language models or other AI models? There's like a tension, because on the one hand, of course, you have to respect the copyright owners and all the other sort of rights that are in the original data, and so there's the legal side, but then there's also the cultural side, because Finnish is a relatively small language, and of course we are concerned about also that not getting sort of lost in this or getting overwhelmed by bigger languages. So we want to make sure that future AI services are also working in our own language and understand our culture. And in that sense, I think it would be beneficial if we could provide as much as possible training material. And the law and the new EU directive on text and data mining and all that, it's unfortunately still quite unclear on what's allowed and what isn't, because there are rules, but they are really hard to interpret in particular cases. And then the publishers are really nervous about this, and they are also adding all these clauses into new contracts that our material shouldn't go anywhere near an AI system, basically. So it's not only about training, but all other kinds of interaction with AI as well. It's seen as very suspicious. So I don't know.
So I wanted to add another layer of complication because, like, in preparation for this AI in the Commons community call that we're going to have in June, we've been talking to our special guest, Matilde Pavis. She is a researcher, and she is mostly researching AI in the context of intellectual property and digital heritage, and she was saying that like we're talking about image and text, but then a lot of the institutions also have recordings of performances or speech recordings that have to be transcribed or annotated, and translating this to data, which is also important for training models. It's getting even more complicated with that.
I wanted to segue into this language issue. We unfortunately don't have a representative from these projects, the Turku NLP, but I would maybe, what would you what kind of a question would you ask about small languages and their problems in the AI space and special needs, special problems? Anyone, like, this would be the topic. Anyone would come up with the right question, or just start the discussion.
The problems with, like, creating a data set?
Yeah, what are the peculiarities, the special needs? Why do we need language models for small languages or small language models? And like, how to go about them, what are the problems with them, and so on. So
I think we also need them not just for, like, building small language models, but also for the big language models, because they basically make a data set better. Because the algorithm can, like, the model can learn more based on more diverse data it gets, and so not only from English language on which it has been primarily trained, and we know why, but it basically enhances the performance. It just makes it smarter or more sensitive. So it actually just also helps the technology itself. There is an issue of representation there as well, but yes.
I have some presentations from the Turku NLP people, and it seems, at least in Finland, that the amount of data is the problem. We have huge supercomputers now that can be used for mining the data, but there's not enough Finnish texts for them, which is interesting. And for example, we have been working with the sort of historical data and so on. The further you go into the history, the less there is data. So you can perhaps learn lots of things about modern movies and stuff like that, because lots of stuff on the net available. But when you go to history, there are unique events there, and we cannot do. And I would also like to raise another question here. We are always speaking nowadays about the large language models, but if you think of Wikidata and the structured data that's there, it's actually based on logic. It has semantics, and it can be used for AI, good old-fashioned AI. That's what we have been doing for a while now, and that's also something to think of, that there are lots of things that you can sort of do AI based on the data. Like we are now mining or making systems, like you can ask questions at how are Finnish artists related to Italy. or mining Wikipedia linkages and finding out how things are related in the world. So there are things that you can do even with the structured data without any large language models, and that's other branch of artificial intelligence that's now sort of forgotten a bit at the moment.
From an international perspective, it's interesting that languages like Finnish are the examples of small languages. Finnish is, of course, not a small language. It's spoken by millions of people. This is not what we normally talk about as a small language. We have Basque raising its hand over there, for example, through its representative here. And if Finnish is struggling, that means that a very small number of languages have enough text for what we're talking about here. Because even a lot of languages which have more speakers than Finnish have less text. Finnish has, while being fairly young as a literary language, still for the majority of the time when humans have produced a lot of text, Finnish has been around, people have had access to computers and so on. So the technology we're talking about is, if Finnish is far away from having enough data, then almost no languages will have enough data. And that is, of course, a problem for national identity, for cultural preservation, of course, for being able to use this technology in an efficient manner when it won't work as well in your language. And we see this, for example, with machine translation, where machine translation has become very, very good recently compared to what it used to be for most everyday purposes. For a lot of languages, you can use machine translation. But that number of languages, when I say a lot of languages, what are they, like 80, 90? There's no good scientific definition of language, but the number people typically say is 6,000. So those languages would also be interesting because the languages which are struggling already will be struggling even more.
I think one solution is these neurosymbolic systems that people are now sort of developing. Since we have data, that's a very big resource. For example, if you want to know that carrots are vegetables, if you try to learn or teach the computer this kind of simple things that we all know in ontologies and data sets that we have, it's not very reasonable actually. I remember one student came 10 years ago and showed his neural network stuff where he could start from tabula rasa. So the computer knows nothing in the beginning, and then it really could find out that carrots are vegetables, and he was excited. And, okay, it's exciting, but on the other hand, so what? We know that already, and we need to combine somehow the things that we have there embedded in the texts and the things that we have huge databases and knowledge graphs available. And how can that be done? That's interesting. Yeah.
So, adding what Johan said, I'm from the Basque community, and we have a quite good model of language. I mean, it's one of the smaller languages that, well, has quite some capacities on doing things, but still we are in the third division. I mean, it's English is the first one. Maybe German, French, Spanish are also there, quite near. And then there are other 20, 30 languages that can compete somehow. And then there are like 50, 60 languages that, well, they are doing something, and the other 6,000 languages will disappear in the next generation. That's the panorama we are facing now. And one of my worries is that, for example, some of the ideas that you have presented, can we fact check something against Wikipedia? Can we fact check against English Wikipedia? Because there is not that capacity to do that. So English Wikipedia, which is the largest one, will be even larger and even better, but the others will always be I mean, they are behind, and now there will be, I don't know if it's correct, more behind. It's not correct, more behind, but I mean, even the distance will be growing. And for getting an example, one thing we are doing with artificial intelligence is trying to make Wikipedia articles for children. So the easiest way now is to take the English Wikipedia articles, say to ChatGPT, translate this for children, then translate from the English result to Spanish, and then from Spanish to Basque. So there are 3 layers of corruption there where you can fail. There is no simple way to summarize an article in Basque. And even the articles in Spanish are not well summarized. In English, it's fairly good. It's fairly good. It's not perfect, but it's fairly good. And that's my concern. I mean, we are talking about a lot of things that can be done, but can be done in English. Maybe German, French, etc., but it's there. So I don't know which is how can we handle this in a multi-language system that, as Wikimedia is, but also others?
I'd like to prompt also, we have a representative of a Sami project here, have another layer of comments here, and then we can bring it back to the panel.
Thank you, Sana. No, I also want to comment. I think I would be a bit more maybe optimistic on what kind of languages we can benefit from these kind of technologies. I think we have quite many examples of machine translation, also a bit of LLMs nowadays with, let's say, like medium-sized languages, which have a relatively large corpora. Like I think, for example, in Finland too, we don't have with North Sami, for example, or anything yet, but I think because we just have so many written records and institutions like National Library, we are also housing these newspapers, publications, and I think digitizing these and making them available would be enough in principle to get these things running. I think where we really have a problem is with the smallest languages, like let's say Inari Sami with 400 speakers and really quite a small amount of resources. Even if you would scrape everything there, it's still very little. And I think another point of view is when we start to work with smaller communities, smaller languages, I think in some sense languages like Finnish, they're kind of public goods, like everyone can do whatever they want with them, and like they're not really owned by anyone in that sense. But then if you have very small languages, then the collaboration with the language communities and the organizations comes very different question and much more important, and also something which may be complicated to navigate in this wiki space, sort of public contribution by everybody and so on. But thank you, interesting discussions.
So I have a comment on the earlier discussion here about what is a small language. So I think it's a lot about policy and history bias. People are here mentioning, and perhaps for a good reason, German, which is my second language, as a large language. Well, I think it's threatened. I think German is no longer, now this comes to the question of politics, I think it's no longer pure. There's so many expressions in German which are for no good reason predominantly used in English. And if we train the models based on a historic bias which is recent, you will see an overdominance of unnecessary English. Whereas if you train the models based on historic texts, which would be, it doesn't have to be 100 years old, but the older it is, the more clean in a sense it is. So it becomes a political issue and a technical issue based on what you use to train your models. And if this is a problem not just with Finnish, but with German, which is mentioned as one of the biggest languages, well, what about the smaller ones then?
So I wanted to say that it's pretty clear that if we would like to make generative AI better, we need bigger and better data sets. But in order to create a lot of that, there is just like a lot of work needed, like maybe a new wave of digitization, like a lot of maybe very intentional content creation. And this, of course, costs money. Like we keep talking about AI can be made better with communities, but you know, how many people and for whom is it even still interesting to contribute, for example, like even to Wikipedia, like in this new way? Like, is it still as exciting as just writing an article yourself? So I'm like a bit worried about the community being an answer. And in terms of the allocation of money, you know, which maybe could be done at the EU level and everything, this is also important, but I'm also sort of upset about how reactionary we have to be, because technologies are accelerating, and so we have to pay so much attention to this right now. And you know, who knows, maybe there are more important issues, but here we are instead caught in the AI hype. And we have to be, because we need to have a say in how these technologies are developed. But yes, still.
Yeah, speaking to more important issues, it's good that you raised money, because something that was on my mind as well is energy. So the increasing energy cost in a context where we're supposed to be, you know, dramatically reducing our dependence on sort of cheap energy. So, you know, I think that's where some of what you were talking about this morning in terms of like, what's the least possible AI that we need to solve a task? And if there's another way that is easily in hand, we shouldn't, for the sake of innovation, over-engineer these things and dramatically increase our energy usage and that kind of thing. So there's money, there's also perhaps even more pressingly sort of energy considerations as well. So I really just keep coming back to your talk this morning and that sort of reminder to go with the smallest, lightest, kind of simplest solution that's to hand. Obviously, we need to pay some attention to this space. We need to be experimenting in order to understand it. You can't understand it, you know, purely theoretically, but like a really good caution about how much we should be doing and how enthusiastically we should be sort of trying to go down that path right now.
Thank you. I think, you know, we are at time. We can continue, but I think we want to, you know, stretch our legs and prepare for the next thing. What if we give a big hand at this point to this wonderful panel? Yes, sure. Stay where you are. This is group photo now. Okay. Oh, yes, of course. Hey, one more thing. If you don't want to be photographed, then, well,